Hello, everyone. This is Bill Meridian speaking to you from New York on July 14th, 2025. The Federal Reserve has certainly been in the news. I tried to get this out last week, but I was unable to do so. So let's take a look. And by the way, I have a new additional website in addition to billmeridian.com. I have billmeridianastrology.com in case you want to go and take a look. Here is a chart of the Fed. On December 23, 1913 at 6:02 p.m., President Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act into law. Now, about the birth time, there was a book that was found by Jim Valier, who was an astrologer way back in the 80s, 70s, 80s. I haven't seen him in many years. And that book stated that the president signed the bill at 6:02 p.m. We know because it was a live radio broadcast. And he said at 6:02, I am now signing the bill. If you want backup for that, the Federal Reserve itself says that the president entered the room at 6, walked to his desk, and signed the bill. So I think that's pretty accurate. And what we want to notice about the Federal Reserve is, of course, the world points. If you're not familiar with the world points, they are 0 of the cardinal signs. So it's 0 Aries, 0 Cancer, 0 Libra, and 0 Capricorn. Any planet at 15 is in 45-degree aspect and is considered to be connected. It is not a world point, it's connected to the world point. And so here we see the midheaven 0 Aries 23. And of course, that means the IC is 0 Libra 23. Pluto 0 Cancer 05. And the Sun 1 Capricorn 32. So you talk about world points. This chart is full of them. And here we have the moon at 14 Scorpio 31. So you've got some of the most important points here. The sun, the moon, the midheaven, very important points all tied up in this big T-square. So no wonder it's in the news because we're having an eclipse at 0 Libra in September, and that eclipse is opposite the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in this chart is on the midheaven. The eclipse is going to be on the 4th house cusp. And Saturn and Neptune, of course, will be together conjunct until, I don't think they're exact until February of 2026. So the Federal Reserve is in the news and under pressure from the White House. The natal Fed chart has many important planets at the world points. So does Chairman Powell, or I should say ex-Chairman Powell as of last night. The upcoming eclipse I already mentioned. This conjunction is exact in February 2026. A summary of what I just said. Now here's the Fed on the 90-degree dial, and you can see this cluster up here, Sun, midheaven, Pluto, 0 Aries. And here's the moon down here in hard aspect to it. But what I have put the pointer on here is Jupiter, Apollon. Jupiter, Apollon, right out of the book, is money in circulation. So here we have Jupiter, Apollon equals Hades over here, midheaven, Pluto, and 0 Aries. Jupiter, Apollon equals Hades is destruction of the money supply. So how does this all work out? At the end of the war, it was decided, with Neptune at 0 Libra, or about in early degrees of Libra, that the dollar would be the reserve currency of the world. Each country that was receiving dollars thought a dollar was as good as gold. Because back in the old days, prior to 1933, you could go to the bank and exchange your paper dollar for silver or gold. However, the US had started inflating the currency. In other words, printing more dollars or issuing more credit than which it had gold to redeem these notes, which is what they are. Look at it, the money. It says Federal Reserve note. A note implies a debt. And as explained in the wonderful book, The Monetary Sin of the West by Jacques Rueff, who was de Gaulle's finance minister and advisor at the end of World War II, He placed France back on a very sound money system, and the international powers forced him off of it and back into inflating the currency. The monetary sin of the West was that all of the countries in the world thought a dollar was as good as gold. So if they have a dollar in their treasury, they can issue further credit versus that dollar because the dollar can be redeemed in the United States for gold, except that the United States didn't have enough gold because they had issued too many dollars. So, in other words, they imported inflation all over the world. That's the meaning of the cardinal connections. When an entity has a lot of cardinal connections, it means they connect directly to the world, can influence the world, or be influenced by it very easily. And as many of you know, Eustace Mullins was an old friend of mine. He wrote the book Secrets of the Federal Reserve, had no idea what he was getting into when he wrote it, but he talked about the origins of it. It is actually a credit creating corporation in which most of the stock, a little over 50%, is controlled by the big New York City banks. That's a direct clipping from the New York Times that is in Eustace's book. And Eustace was hounded most of his life for revealing these secrets. And he told me, he said, Bill, you know, most of those books that I based my research on, I got from the Library of Congress. They're not there anymore. They took them off the shelves. And if you oppose the Federal Reserve, your odds are not too good. There were two presidents who decided to take the money-making power into the hands of the national government, which is where it belongs. They were Lincoln and Kennedy. And by the way, the Federalist Papers forbid Congress, which has the power to coin money, it forbids them to delegate their powers to anyone else. So this entire thing is unconstitutional. So now here we have Jay Powell. Now, does he have any planets in the cardinal axis? Well, yes, the sun is 15, which is 45 degrees from the cardinal axis. And here you have Cupido, which is unity in groups close to 0 Libra, which means it is getting eclipsed. And we can go one more slide and see there's progressed Mercury at 0 Aries. So we have 0 Aries, 0 Libra, 15 Aquarius. The intricate relation between the Fed and Chairman Powell are obvious. So the Saturn-Neptune effect. Well, the way I look at Saturn-Neptune first is Neptune is what we wish was true. Saturn is what is true. If you've never been to Austria and you're wondering what it's like, that's Neptune. When you get there, Saturn grounds you. You see what it's really like. As an English professor once said to me, show me someone who has no illusions and I'll show you someone who is not bothered very much by Saturn or Neptune. Very true. Fox Business News openly discussed the actual origin and unconstitutional basis of the Fed. I stopped whatever I was doing when Charles Payne said this on Fox Business News this past week. So this conjunction is exact in February 2026, and if you trace U.S. history, Saturn-Neptune does bring scandals. Why? Well, if you drain the swamp, you see all the wreckage at the bottom, and as I said, Neptune is a balloon or an illusion. Saturn pops the balloon. So this conjunction of Saturn-Neptune is on the Fed MC. Now, MC is your public image. It is square the sun and Pluto, 135 to the moon, cannot be favorable for the reputation of the Fed. So between now and February, I think we're going to hear more and more about how it really works, and it is not going to be too attractive. Now, the one item that I had worried about is it was Rothschild who said, give me control over a nation's money supply, and I care not who makes its laws. That means he could contract the money supply in a country and the media will blame the president for it or the king and they'll throw him out and in comes someone who's favorable to the bankers. I was a bit afraid of that, but now I think that is not too likely if we have a person running the Fed, we don't know who it is yet, in position. But just the same, it is not positive for this institution and we actually should shrink the money supply because there is simply too much credit being issued. And this is the reason prices are so high. It is not that the value of the goods or items or real estate is going up. It is that the purchasing power of each individual Federal Reserve note is going down. And as some wise man once said, currencies don't float, they merely sink at different rates, saying that every country is inflating their currency, and it's just a question of who's inflating theirs more than the other guys. So if I would have posted this last week, I would have said that I think Powell is being forced out of his job, but I think it was obvious by late in the week, so I didn't bother to put this up then. But however, this conjunction is not exact until February of 2026. So I think between here and now, a lot of dirty laundry will be coming out of the Fed, and they're building a very expensive new building. And I think you'll hear a lot about that, and there'll probably be some moves to cut back on that to save money. So my mundane book, Mastering Geopolitical Prediction, The Predictive Power of Eclipse Paths. We also have 2 copies of In Search in what I call the Scholar Series. These are reprints or reproductions of Charles Jane's In Search magazine. We also have Planetary Economic Forecasting and Planetary Stock Trading 4. Those are available at billmeridian.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll be talking to you again soon. Goodbye.